Brutality builds are about doing lots of damage really, really fast. It's part of actually what makes Brutality, for me, some of the most fun runs to do. You get to literally see enemies melt as you actually get a really good scaling and really good synergistic build going within Dead Cells. You do sacrifice a little bit of the HP gain that you would have from going with a survival build. You're not as much of a tank, but you are more of an actual weapon, or something that can set things on fire or cause enemies to bleed and cause them to actually die when you're moved on and not around anymore. Doing a Brutality build, you want to be looking for things that allow you to maximize damage output as quickly as possible and damage over time as well. Out of the gate, you're not going to have all too many weapons at your disposal, but some of the melee weapons that you will have, you'll notice, are Brutality scaling. And while they don't seem like they're that powerful compared to weapons you'll open up later in the game, some of the things like a blood sword or firebrands actually do really, really good with helping you on a Brutality build because they got that damage over time. One thing to think about that you could pick up pretty early on is the blood sword, which causes bleeding just by swinging. You can parry this with something that might synergize with enemies that are bleeding, and suddenly you've got a good combination of a weapon that's really easy to pick up and really any number of other equipments that are going on that are available to you as well. Doing bleed is great damage over time, just like fire would be, because it allows you to not only have your direct strikes, but also if you're within a crowd of lots of enemies, it allows you to hit one or two of them and leave them to die on their own while you take care of other enemies that may be trying to swarm you. Another way of running with something that you'll have pretty early on is a fire build with an oiled sword. Well, you don't technically need the oiled sword, but the oiled sword will get crits for 10 seconds after striking an enemy that's on fire. That means you don't have to have a lot of things on fire. You could have just a fire grenade and an oiled sword, use your fire grenade, strike an enemy, and then for 10 seconds you've now got critical shots going around to any other enemies that you run across, or within bosses as well. One of my favorite things to run with is actually having an oiled sword and either a torch or firebrands, as that way you've got something you can throw really quickly that doesn't have a cooldown, that also allows you to get those criticals with your oiled sword. Now, to be honest, every now and then from time to time when I just need to blow off some steam or cool down, or I've been frustrated by dying too often in Dead Cells, I'll grab some firebrands and a torch and a fire grenade, literally anything that does fire, and throw them all together and then just run through a biome, just chucking fire and grenades and throwing firebrands around and setting everything on fire and running through and seeing how much dies without me really having to pay attention. I'll go back through and mop up afterwards with the second round, but with significantly fewer enemies in a biome, it makes it a lot easier. It's actually a really, really good build for running through biomes pretty quickly. Something really nice about both bleed and fire is that bosses don't nerf themselves on them. You can have a fire build, and you'll notice you'll be able to set the concierge or timekeeper or even the hand of the king on fire, and they will burn. Same with bleed. They will get a little bit more resistance to bleed than they will to the fire, but it's nothing like the resistance that they get to frost. It's actually a very good strategy and something that's end game. I think my fastest timekeeper fight ever actually was using a flamethrower turret and just seeing the timekeeper just melt under that fire damage. It's a lot of fun. You don't have many options for ranged other than throwing the firebrands around, or maybe a throwing knife, but anything that's a direct, high direct damage output, you don't have a lot of bows that are at your disposal. However, you can pick up the infantry bow, which does a critical at short range. So pair an infantry bow with something like maybe a shield that you've picked up, and you can get in close, you can still block and parry attacks while doing critical damage using your infantry bow. It's actually a very solid build and something to look at as well fairly early on in the game. Now, speaking of shields, there are not a lot of shields that are going to scale for Brutality. You've got your Bloodthirsty shield pretty early out of the gate. There's also a frontline shield you'll be able to pick up later on, but otherwise everything is either tactics or survival scaling. But for shields, this is actually okay. You can go off color and pick up a non-Brutality shield, and it will still work for the purpose of doing parries and allowing you then to get your hits on with your primarily melee weapon. Okay, so what about mutations? Now, I was informed last time after I made the last video that, yes, with 1.9, Necromancy has been nerfed, and is not really a good pickup unless you're running Survival. It's not going to give you any healing unless you're under 50%, and because that's not going to scale when you're with Brutality, it's not really that good of a pickup. There are some mutations that you can look at that'll give you something for the purpose of healing. Like, for example, you could pick up Velocity if you've got that from the Timekeeper, or in the Frenzy mutation, which you'd have to get to that 8-minute door in Toxic Sewers. Those two combined gives you healing so long as you have a speed boost, and Velocity gives you that additional speed boost. So that's a nice way of getting some healing. You can pick up Dead Inside as a colorless mutation. That means you won't be able to pick up any more food, but you're going to get most of your healing from your healing flasks anyway that recharge between each and every biome. So if you've really got nothing else to choose from, I'd say go ahead and pick up that Opened Wounds mutation. That's going to give you a bleed upon every melee strike that you have. You're still going to get that nice damage over time that's going to be applied every time you strike an enemy. So that's really pretty much it for Brutality early game. Look for ways of doing lots of damage and do lots of bleed and lots of burn, and you should be actually doing quite alright and seeing yourself succeeding when you're picking Brutality. As I mentioned in my first video, you want to make sure you're re-rolling those affixes on your weapons to make sure you got the bleed and burn synergies depending upon your build. That's really going to take you to the next level and hopefully get you past the Hand of the King and picking up some of those boss cells. Well, that's really it for this time. Coming up in the next video, we're going to be going through a tactics build, so make sure you are subscribed so that you see when that next video comes out. And until then, stay safe and happy gaming.